Hello friends, for today's video I wanted to touch on the topic of where has all the fantasy gone? This is a question that I see arise pretty often these days, and I understand where the root of this question is. I think there are the extremes. There are people out there who are just angry at the fact that things like fantasy romance and contemporary romance are really, really popular, and they go out of their way to diminish both the enjoyment of those things as well as those things themselves, which is by no means what I am planning on doing today, nor do I think that that's what everybody who asks the question of where's all the fantasy gone. I don't think that everybody who asks that question is fitting within that extreme. I think what it comes down to is that fantasy romance, contemporary romance, they are exceptionally popular these days. It's exciting for people that are fans of those things, and as always, I want people to enjoy the books they're picking up. I want people to be able to find what they're looking for, and I want the books that authors write, the stories that they have poured so much into, to find the readers that are going to gain the most from that, or get the most, or resonate with those things the most. I always want people to find what they're looking for. And I really think right now that it's just not just that it's popular because a lot of people love the more romantically driven stories. I don't even think it's just that. It's that there's also the people that are picking those books up with the intention of making fun of them, with the intention of mocking them because they know they're popular and they know that if they hate on them, that that's going to be its own version of popular too. If you even one time have a reviewer review something that is more in the romance category, whether it be fantasy romance or contemporary romance or something in between, if even one time you watch a video where somebody's talking about fantasy romance, then all of a sudden you're flooded with your algorithm pouring recommendations to you, and it can feel like, all right, yeah, I know that those books exist. What about the rest though? So I have done videos in the past talking about fantasy books where the romance isn't the prominent factor and motivation to flip the page, and if that's something you're interested in, I'll have those linked. But I specifically wanted to frame today a little differently, because with the rise of fantasy romance specifically, I think a lot of us we can point to the origin being ACOTAR as an example, but I think when it really kicked off and it feels like all the tables and the displays at bookstores, and it feels like everybody is talking about these things online. The thing that I think was sort of the catalyst for this all was Fourth Wing. So what I wanted to do is, from the time that Fourth Wing came out, which was in 2023, I wanted to only talk about books that came out 2023, 2024, and this year, because I feel like maybe marketing, understandably, is fitting within the trend of fantasy romance. That's a lot of what they're pushing. That's what the publishers are putting out because they know it's what's making them the most money. And maybe they're not giving as much time and attention to talking about the books that I'm going to mention today. So I'm going to talk about the books that we're going to be covering. And as always, I'll have all these linked in the description bar. If I have any more in-depth reviews, I'll have those linked as well, because we are going to kind of just do an overview. I tried to also find a variety of different kinds of fantasy books, so that hopefully there's something that fits your tastes. However, I also really, really want to make clear that everything I'm discussing today is in no way meant to diminish the impact that fantasy romance has, or to try and act as though one is better than the other. In fact, for today's video, I am partnering with Alloreal. A huge thanks to them for working with me on today's video. And what I like about Alloreal is that they're very, very clear that they are a book box dedicated to fantasy romance. They're not saying that they're a fantasy and then it's mostly fantasy romance, so you feel like you still just don't know what you're going to get. They're very clear that what they're putting out is fantasy romance, and the way it works is that every single month there are 3 different selections for you to choose from, and within those selections, if you want just one of the books, you can just get one, you can get 2, or you can get all 3. Also, not only is Alloreal really flexible with the selections by having a variety of different kinds of romantasy works, they also allow for you to skip. So if there's something that doesn't really catch your interest that particular month, you can skip and you won't be charged, which I think is a really great feature to have, even though they do already have the 3 different options, and all of the options are special limited editions. So it's not just these single books, but also they have all the bells and whistles to go along with it. I know July sold out really fast. Well, I'm really interested in one of the books this particular month, so I have a feeling that some of it's going to sell out. If you are interested, you can get your first book for $19.99 using the code FADED, but I want to mention the books that they have for the month of September. The one that I am the most excited about, as it's been an anticipated release of mine for a while now, would be Wild Reverence by Rebecca Ross. As you can see, here is the hardback, the back of it, and then you have the sprayed edges as well. And the design of the sprayed edges isn't just here, it also goes all the way up to the top and the bottom. We also have Song of the Hell Witch. What I kind of like too about this book box is usually there's something that is at least fantasy adjacent that I have my eye on, but then there are going to be things that are outside my niches and my clicks that I haven't heard about as much, and that's true for this one. And within this, you also are going to have this artwork on the inside, which I think is really, really gorgeous. I always like when there's this opening artwork. You have this design on the back as well, and then just like with Wild Reverence, you have all the way from the top, the sides, and the bottom, you have the sprayed edges. The last selection would be the Entanglement of Rival Wizards, and this one, as you can see, has a little bit more of the cute factor to it. It's especially prevalent on not just the cover art, but the designs here on the edges, and then they have a quote on the back. Also, if you're in need of some bookmarks, they do come with a bookmark every month, and if you're somebody who likes to journal, they also have stickers that you can put alongside your thoughts for any of the books that you pick up. I'll have all relevant information in the description bar down below. If you're interested in checking them out, a reminder that the code this month is FADED, and a big thank you again to Alloreal for partnering with me on today's video. Jumping into the fantasy books, there are going to be 7 different things mentioned. Some of them, though, are going to include entire series. Some of these are fantasy standalones, and some of them are books that are new within series. So if they sound interesting to you, you can jump onto the bandwagon and get excited for the books as their sequels are released. And that's true for the very first one, which would be The Will of the Many. This I probably don't need to say too much about because it very much became a booktube darling as soon as it entered the scene. If you've not heard too much about it, then congratulations, I guess, because I feel like everybody was talking about it, and also a lot of people are continuing to talk about it because its release is going to be coming out very soon. But a simplistic way to summarize this is it's kind of like if Red Rising, rather than being science fiction, was actually fantasy. The setup for the story is you have this society that very much has sort of a hierarchy, and this is in part due to how people are able to gain power, and it has to do with the fact that people have will, and the will is something that you can actually extract from individuals. So there are people at the bottom who perpetually have their will taken from them, and every participant of society has their will taken to some degree, somewhat like a tax. And then there are the people at the very, very top who have all of the power rooted in the will that is extracted, and they are making all of the decisions on behalf of all of society. And this one particular young man, who is our main protagonist in the story, is somebody who has tried as much as possible to not feed into this system. However, early on, he is tasked with infiltrating the system and then trying to gain as much information as possible through this kind of mysterious benefactor, we'll say. And it is through this that you have, at the first installment anyway, a lot of introduction into the mysteries of their world and the major players, and also maybe there's more to the world than even our protagonist realize, and maybe there's more to the protagonist than you realize, because it does seem like he himself has a mysterious past. If you're somebody who would prefer to pick up a completed series, then we have The Drowning Empire. This third installment did come out, I believe, technically the same year as Fourth Wing. I believe it was a 2023 release. And the first book in this series is fantastic in regards to the fact that it's such a genre blender. It very much combines mystery thriller components as well as some of the moral questions that arise within science fiction, while all being within a fantasy story and utilizing both first and third person perspectives in a way that I found really captivating and fitting for this story. Since the completion of this trilogy, this author has released another book, and I really enjoyed this trilogy as a whole. The other story, while it had pieces that I really liked, it didn't personally work for me. However, as always, I will recommend books even if they weren't exactly to my taste. And that one did have some aspects to it that were really, really fantastic. Specifically, there's one plot line of somebody kind of descending into this cave-like journey to the center of the earth feel, and it's very thriller, horror feeling, and that was my favorite part of the story. But there's a variety of perspectives in that one, and that's not the only setup for it. If you're interested in that one, I'll have my new fantasy releases wrap up where I talked about it, so you can hear a little bit more about it. The Drowning Empire, very different. You follow two main protagonists as well as some side characters, but within the two main protagonists, you have one, her name is Lynn, and she's next in line for the throne. However, Lynn has lost her memories, and she does not have the ability really to understand how to use their magic, which is very significant for the entirety of their country, as it has to do with the ability to use bone fragments in order to control these things called constructs. And their society very much relies on the constructs. Then you have another character who, after having a lot of what are basically like major catastrophes happen with the actual literal islands, they are just kind of trying to get by and find their missing wife. And there seems to be a mystery surrounding what happened to their wife. And you don't really see how these two plot lines are going to converge, but you have fun guessing. And also you have fun guessing as to what happened with Lynn in the past as well, what's going on with her memories. And when I say it's a genre blender, I would say the more thriller, horror, and sci-fi components to the story feel present within Lynn's plotline. Jovis is the other perspective. That's where you're going to see a lot of the fantasy. I do think that books 2 and 3 are much more fantasy heavy, but that first installment really had quite the introduction. It was my favorite as a result of those things, but I do feel like the series as a whole is quite a solid fantasy trilogy. Speaking of solid fantasy, it doesn't get much better than this. This is a standalone, another booktube darling, one of my favorite books that I've picked up this year, and that would be Blood Over Bright Haven. I think this is really well loved for good reason. I'm obviously biased because I also really happen to love it, but it just shows the skilled efficiency of this author, which I know that's a weird compliment to give, but the fact that she was able to tell such an amazing story with fantastic world building, really compelling, flawed, and depending on which character you're talking about, likable or unlikable characters, and all of it having some of the most intense thematic elements that by no means felt like they were only scratching the surface. The length of time was plenty because this author just knows how to tell a story in a standalone. I think there aren't too many authors who write standalones better because obviously, if you don't know, this author also wrote Sword of Kaigen, which is fantastic and really emotionally gutting. Blood Over Bright Haven follows a society that is very oppressive to certain groups of people, which includes our main character, as she is a woman, and within their society, women are viewed as less than, less intelligent, less in basically every way. And so she's had to really scrape by to prove that she is just as capable as her male counterparts. She has the opportunity to rise up within their society, specifically with their magic system, we'll say, because she is very, very skilled with it, and she's kind of entering into this academic setting. You really feel for her because she has to go through all these ridiculous trials, not literal trials, this isn't a trials plotline type of story, but the trials that she has to face as an individual. So you see her as an underdog. However, you also see that the system that she wants to partake in, the system that she so badly wants to recognize her as valuable, also is a system that really oppresses where we have our other perspective. He is somebody who has tried to escape this horrific phenomenon that is occurring outside of the protection of this city. He barely made it into the city, but now that he's here, the city treats him like he should just be grateful and that he should just work really hard and almost work to serve the rest of them. Otherwise, he doesn't really deserve to be here. She feeds into the system inevitably too, and so you're really analyzing all of that while also questioning how the magic works. Fantastic book. Can't recommend Blood Over Bright Haven enough. And also, just get ready because I feel like this author knows how to deliver on the emotional hits. Returning to some firsts in series, and also a book whose sequel was originally, I believe, scheduled to be released this year, but I think it got pushed back to early 2026, and that would be The Adventures of Amina Al-Sarafi. So this is by S.A. Chakraborty, the same author who wrote the David Bod series. The David Bod series did conclude before 2023. Really, really love that trilogy, one of my favorite series of all time. And it is more high, maybe you could even argue epic fantasy, whereas this is more just such fun adventure fantasy. You follow this character named Amina, who's kind of at the end of her adventurous days. She can't really resist, but she tries. And also age is catching up to her. She's got a bad knee, and she also has a daughter who she cares very, very much about, who she is looking out for. Her daughter is her whole world. She loves her dearly. But after some people have presented something she can't really refuse, she finds herself being called back to adventure. And then from there, you just have the plot unfold in ways that are so fun. And also, I just feel like adventure stories are fun in different ways, because just saying adventure story doesn't necessarily capture exactly what that means. Does it mean it's a plot story? Does it mean it's an epic fantasy adventure where you're going from point A to point B and you're chased by troll-like creatures? I mean, what are we talking about when we say adventure? And in this story, and something I think S.A. Chakraborty does really well, is she utilizes lore from things that are different from most of fantasy. So consistently while I was picking this up, I found myself stopping to read about these various different creatures or beings that would emerge within the story, because I wanted to see if there was some kind of cool artwork for those things or learn more about them. And it was just so fun, because I think we're so accustomed to a certain kind of fantasy. So to have something where a lot of its origins are rooted in something different was exceptional. And I feel like specifically the way S.A. Chakraborty utilized those things was exceptional. So much fun. I can't wait till we get the next book. As you can see, we have so far a variety here where The Will of the Many and Blood Over Bright Haven are kind of asking certain questions to do with society and how we fit within it. This is a fun adventure. I definitely think that the Drowning Empire series kind of is high fantasy genre blenders. So there's a lot of mixes already within these entries. And continuing with that, this next one is horror fantasy, specifically The Empire of the Wolf. The second and third installments have come out over the last couple of years. The first one came out a little bit before that. It would be Justice of Kings. So maybe you recognize it more so from the first story. But as always, I'm kind of on repeat when I give the description for this series. You follow a man named Von Volt, who is judge, jury, executioner, and detective all in one. And the series is really asking what happens when one individual or a group of individuals have that much power. How does that affect the rest of society? While simultaneously having a lot of really frightening things that occur when it comes to questions about the afterlife and what is awaiting our characters in death. And I feel like the way that we branch those two things together and connect them is specifically through the fact that people like Von Volt have the ability to use basically necromancy in their investigations. And so that's kind of what opens the door to the truth of things. And that's a truth that maybe we don't really want to actually know. And I feel like the way that we explore that throughout this series is fascinating and truly, truly frightening. I don't want to say too much else, but even though I'm talking about that character being the protagonist, technically you follow that character's protege named Helena. She's the one that's telling you the story, and she's kind of looking back and telling you about her time as the protege. But because she is constantly following Von Volt, it almost feels like he is the protagonist, or at the very least, he's like the center of things. He is gravity, and he's the thing that the story is orbiting around, you could say. And so as a result, even though Helena's telling the story and she's a protagonist, it can feel like he is as well. It's a fantastic series. Speaking of series conclusions, we also, of course, have Wind and Truth, the completion of the first arc of the Stormlight Archive by Brandon Sanderson. I probably don't really need to say too much about Stormlight Archive, because if you are a fantasy fan, you have heard about it. You've probably heard about it more than you even want to. Even if you're a fan of the Stormlight Archive, you've heard about it a lot. And I don't probably need to give too much information about it, but maybe you're that rare person that's like, I hear everybody talk about it, but I don't actually know what it's about. And if that's you, the setup for the Stormlight Archive is that you follow a few different perspectives within book one. The main perspective of the first book is Kaladin, who at the beginning of the story, when you're introduced to him, you see that he at one time held a pretty high position in the military, and then suddenly he is finding himself enslaved, and you are wondering how he even got to that point. You also will get flashbacks throughout the story that explore Kaladin really, really in depth, not just his backstory, but his present day and how all of these things connect. And part of how all of these things connect have to do with the setup for their society, which is based off of there being light eyes and dark eyes, and Kaladin is a dark eye, so he's already treated as less than. And then some of our other characters that you get perspectives from are light eyes. For example, you have the character Shallan, who is trying to ingratiate herself to somebody of prestige and power in an effort to gain something to help her falling and crumbling house and her family as well. And then you get somebody who is in a position of extreme power, and that would be Dalinar Kholin, who previously was known for being this menace on the battlefield known as the Blackthorn, but that seems to be behind him now, and he's now trying to work toward a society that can function within peacetime and continue to have peace, because this was a culture that was very much rooted in war. He wants to ensure that there's prosperity, and he wants to adhere to a certain kind of code, but he also is looked down upon by his peers because it seems as though he's abandoning the very thing that made him powerful and strong, and their entire culture and their entire country powerful and strong. So he's almost seen as this outlier, and there's a lot of animosity between him and his son. And then, as noted, Kaladin is kind of the main perspective, so you're exploring the ways that he is trying to rise through his circumstances, specifically pretty much some of the most awful circumstances you can imagine as a slave. And you see the way all these pieces come together. It starts somewhat actually closed, and then it opens up as you progress, not just through the first book, but the entirety of the series. And the 5th installment is where things just get so explosive, so off the walls. If you've never checked out Stormlight Archive, it's kind of not the easiest recommendation to give because it is quite an undertaking. Yes, most of the Cosmere books can be consumed in isolation, but the further into Stormlight you go, the more it's recommended that you read other Cosmere works so that you know how everything is connected. And also, the 5th book wasn't really the most satisfying of conclusions. It's more like a stepping stone into what the next arc is going to be, which of course we're not going to get the completion of that for probably maybe decades. So there's a lot with Stormlight, but if you've ever wanted to give it a try, that 5th book did come out within the last couple of years, and it did have quite the big splash. And then last, we have another fantasy standalone book, and this is a line of succession plotline, and that would be Ambessa, Chosen of the Wolf. I'm sure most people are aware that this is a League of Legends novel, and this character does appear in the Netflix show Arcane. I love Arcane, so, I'm going to recommend the show. But you don't have to watch the show to read this book, as the events within this actually take place before the show. Ambessa is not the main protagonist within the show. She makes an appearance, and she's more so seen as an antagonist. So then you're exploring her backstory and why she is the way she is, and her roots. And part of that has to do with, as noted, this line of succession, where somebody within their clan, the Medarda clan specifically, it looks as though the head of this clan is reaching the end of their life. And it is expected that they are going to name Ambessa as the next leader of this clan. However, they were not formally able to give this declaration before they died, and that is why we're now seeing this line of succession plotline where there's a lot of infighting within the Medarda clan, which is a problem because they can't afford to not have a united front. They have a lot of other adversaries who are very much eager to pick them apart as they are fighting amongst each other, and she is very eager to put this to rest, to take her rightful place at the top, and then that way she can create a united front and push back against those who would threaten her and hers. It is, I would say, a story where you get the full, this is going to seem like an obvious statement, but you get the full picture by the end. Because there's a lot of, now we're going over here and we're fighting, and now we're trying to flee from this person, and we've been captured, and now we're trying to escape. It's a very fast-paced story, but I feel like the intrigue side of things fully presents itself once you have all the information, and you can kind of look back and you see the story maybe a little differently. And I do like stories like that, especially in stories where, yes, there is a lot of action, and yes, this is moving quickly, but because there is a prominent intrigue plotline, I always want for that situation, for once you have all of the information, it reshapes how you viewed things. That's something I really like within intrigue stories. And in general, if you're just in the mood for something action-packed and fun, and it just feels like a return to not adventure fantasy the way Amina Al-Sarafi is, but just feels, I know it's cheesy to say, but it just feels cool, then this might serve that for you. If you are interested in checking any of these out, I'll have them in the description bar down below. Feel free, of course, to mention some of your own recommendations. They can be popular, they can be lesser known, they could be certain specific subgenres of fantasy. And on that note, if you're interested in me doing this again, or me kind of keeping up with this as a video series to ensure that some of the non-fantasy romance fantasy works out there get a little bit more time to shine, let me know. I'd be happy to keep this up or do this periodically. And then last note, of course, a big thank you again to Alloreal for partnering with me on today's video. You can use the code FADED to get your first book for $19.99. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you later.